Hi, I'm Veli from Greenwood Solutions. Today's presentation is on solar panel framing and advanced spreadsheet. For those of you who watched my basic framing spreadsheet presentation, you'll notice that this particular one has a few more numbers involved. So effectively, I've got a series of inputs and I've broken them into smaller tables. In the first table, we have some panel specs, the row number, the length of the panel in millimeters, the width of the panel, and the number of panels in a particular row. Now in this case here we have 11 rows of panels, but this obviously can be dragged down and you can create an infinite amount of rows. In the next section we have a question: is this one string, yes or no? Now the answer to that basically can relate back to the number of DC isolators in a non-paralleling situation. So if you are putting one DC isolator per string, the answer to this will determine that. Portrait or landscape, I put a P, and that'll reference back to the length of row I use. Now, mid clamp space in millimeters, this is from the manufacturer's data sheet. I put 25 mil, and I've allowed an end clamp space of 30 mil. Now the buffer amount is the amount of extra rail that allows for all those errors that may occur when you're butting a panel up against a clamp and then another panel, etc, etc. After a while, there's a bit of what they call creep, and this 50 mil buffer on both sides allows for that, and you can put whatever figure you like. Length of rail used is 4,000 mil. This depends on the brand you're using. Top rail additional length for DC isolator 300 mil. You put whatever figure you like, or you can put 1 or 0 there if you like. Now the cantilever means the amount of rail that is unsupported on both ends over the foot. So the feet are placed every 1,000 mil, and then the last bit of rail is cantilever 350 mil. Now, without further ado, we'll get stuck into the actual calculations. Now, top frame length. So I'll click on that, and you can see the calculation there. But what I'll also do is, to make things a little bit clearer, is go to formulas. It's a pretty good way of finding out what is involved in your actual formula. So go to formula, and I'm using Mac for Excel, so it might be different. You might have slightly different ribbon, and I'll go trace precedence. And you can see here that this particular formula references, I'll get that back again, references the panel length, the width, the number of panels, portrait or landscape, the mid clamp space, the end clamp space, the buffer amount, and the top rail additional length for DC isolator, etc, etc, etc. So let's have a look at the formula here, and what I'll do is I'll just click out of that. I'll just open up this a little bit and click on that formula there, and you can see it's a fairly long-winded formula, and you can see the cells it references here. Effectively, this formula takes the number of panels into consideration, the amount of spaces between the panels, the end clamp space, the buffer amount, and in the case of the top frame, that extra 300 mil. That's it, back to normal. Now, if you go to the bottom frame length, you can see straight away that the difference here between the top frame length and the bottom frame length is that figure of 300 mil. Obviously, because that 300 mil is there for the DC isolator and an appropriate shroud, and it's not needed on both rails. Now the top frame rounded up, you can see, references R6, which is the length of the top frame, divided by the rail at M6, and then is rounded up to the next whole number, which is 5. Now the bottom frame is the same, except obviously we are referencing S6 instead of R6, but we are dividing by the same rail length of 4,000. And even though it's 300 mil less, you're still rounding up to that 5 number. Frame joiners. Now, obviously, the joiners are like, the way I see it, the joiners are like the mid clams. They are the spaces between the rails. So effectively, we take the figure in T6 and we subtract 1, and then we add the figure in U6 minus 1, and we come up with a figure of 8. So 4 plus 4 equals 8. 5 minus 1, 4, plus 5 minus 1, 4 equals 8. That makes sense. So it's like the mid clams. It's the number of rails minus 1. Like for mid clams, the number of panels minus 1, but times 2. Now the number of feet, we can see from that the spacing is at 1000 mil. We have a cantilever here, and this calculation's a little bit more complicated, but you can see what's sort of going on. We have S6 being reference of the bottom frame length. Now, as you can see with the number of feet, it is based on the bottom frame length. Now, the reason it's not based on the top frame length is because that extra 300 mil is allowed for the DC isolator. And what we are talking about is a cantilever of 350 mil, as you can see here. So you can see what's happening. The S6 minus 2 times O6. So O6 is the cantilever amount, and they're at both ends. And we divide by 1000 because that is a feet spacing in millimeters. And we plus 1 because unlike the frame joiners, we actually add 1 because there's 1 extra foot. It's like doing fence palings. So we add 1 and then we multiply the whole lot by 2. So the number of feet is referencing S6 because the bottom frame length. We're not taking into account the DC isolator top rail length additional in this situation. So you can see it references O6 being the cantilever amount and multiplies that by 2 because obviously there's a cantilever on both ends. Now if I change that cantilever to say 100, you can see straight away that the number of feet has changed. So I'll change that back. Now if I change the feet spacing to 1200, you can see straight away the number of feet has gone back. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, we're going to go to the outputs, the rest of the outputs, and we'll look at those figures, and those figures there, and those figures there. So effectively down here, and I'll just scroll up a little bit, we've got the panel brand being Acme, panel model being Solaris, like the sun, bit of a dad joke there. Panel watts being 400. Now, so their input, so really, ideally, I should make them a different colour, let's say. So to determine, and I should make them the background or the fill yellow. With the spreadsheets, it's a really good idea to sort of colour the cells to delineate between what's an input cell and what's an output cell. And ideally, when you finish with all your calculations and everything's right, to actually lock the cells. So, input, input, input. Now, number of panels. So, a pretty simple formula. So we have summed all of these, E6, E6, all the way down to E16. So sum. So basically it's just adding them together. Seems pretty easy. Total kilowatts of the system. Well, we've taken the figure in E19, 209 panels, multiplying that by the figure in D19, which is a panel wattage, and dividing by 1000 to get kilowatt hours. So let's have a look. There we go, trace our precedence, and you can see straight away where they come from. Okay, so the number of mid clams, this is a bit of an interesting calculation. We've taken the figure in E6 all the way down to E16, but we've subtracted 1 from each of them and then multiplied by 2 using the sum product function, and we've come out with 396 mid clams. Now if I changed that figure there for the panels in row 1 to 100 panels, you can see how the number of mid clams and everything else changes accordingly. Number of end clams, so we use the sum product function again with an if function. So G6 to G16, if that contains a yes, then automatically we put in a 4 because there's 4 end clams per set of rail, unbroken set. And obviously there is 11 rows, so that multiplies that figure of 4 by 11, and hence you get 44. Now if I, for instance, put in a no there, you can see straight away that particular formula disregards that and doesn't count it, and off it goes. So I'll just go back to Y. Number of frames. Quite a simple sum function in Excel. So what it does, it sums from T6 to T16, and then it just adds U6 to U16. Number of frame joiners, it's a similar process. I'm just summing, so frame joiners, all these figures. So it's 11 times 8 is 88. Number of DC isolators, well, it says 10. Now, why is that? And if you look carefully, what's happened with the formula is I've gone count if. So I said if I count from 6 to 15, but hang on, there's an extra row. And if it says Y, I will count. And so there's 10 Ys, but I should really put in, let's change that to 16. And voila, figures 11. Now if I put a no there, you'll see what happens. We'll go back to a 10. So you can see what happens there. So that's a count if. It's a good function in Excel or any other spreadsheet that you're using. Now the number of feet, again a simple sum. So we're summing in W6 all the way down to W16. Comes out with that. Number of rows is counter, so I've used that function and I've gone B6 to B16. So basically counter means if there's text in there, if there's something in that row, it'll count it, and there's 11, so we know there's 11 rows. Now, the physical area in meters squared. I've thrown this in just to show you that this is one of the functions, or one of the things you can do with your panel framing, but I haven't accounted for spacing between the panels. So I'm just looking at the physical nature of the rows and take into consideration the length and the width of the panel, and also how long the actual array is. So if we look here at the physical area in meters squared, it says 438 meters squared, and you can see the calculation. So I've summed R6 to R16 divided by 1000, and I've multiplied that by the panel width in millimeters all the way down from D6 to D16 divided by 1000, because I want to get in meters squared. And I've also incorporated the length because I'm looking at the area, and that shows you the physical area in meters squared. In future presentations, I will look at the actual amount of area taken up, legitimately taking row spacing into consideration as well. But for this one, we're not going to go down that road. So my advice when setting up this spreadsheet or creating your own or using this one is to be very careful and to always check that for each row you're getting the right information, and then if that's the case, this information down here will always be pretty good. Thanks for watching our presentation on advanced solar panel framing calculations. If you have any questions, any inquiries, any answers, please feel free to drop us a line and hit that subscribe button if you see fit. Thanks everyone.